I deny everything but what I have all along admitted. The design on my part to free the slaves.
Intro.
Yeah, quick intro. Jason, I'm a East Bay DSA member, possibly CIA, and got into the reparations because I think that the building a strong leftist movement is going to have to include people of color and specifically Black people, and more specifically, American descendants of slaves. So that's generally why I'm here.
Perfect. Everybody is here. All righty then. Doc, go ahead and go next for us.
I am Doc. I am from the cornfield in the middle of the country, also known as Iowa. I am also possibly a CIA, but
Somebody is. There's
somebody's
like 11 people in the room.
it's like secret agent, secret Hitler up in here. And anyway, I've been on Reset Race a number of times. I also have my own show, Supernova Earth, and Sam has been gracious and kind enough to grace me with her co-hosting skills on that, and I really appreciate that. So I'm here for the conversation and looking forward to it.
All righty then. Awesome. Ida, go ahead and say hello to us.
Hi, I'm Ida from Croatia via New York City in Berkeley, California. Bernie Bro, proud Bernie Bro. And I came to this group via Tim Black's epic video in which he got on the case of white progressives who, because of their lack of solidarity with the Black agenda, and I felt, everything he said was absolutely on point, and that's what led me here eventually.
Sorry, as I'm back on screen. All righty then. Go ahead, Danette.
Hi, I'm Danette LaMonica Hudson. I am here by way of meeting Sam on Twitter. I'm a former Bernie Bro. And I am someone that was raised in the Black Panther movement, the Nation of Islam, and I believe in reparations. I am also a racial healing coach where I work with white women to understand the Native Black American experience and to work with them to free themselves from their past and their fear of talking about race and really becoming allies rather than just dreaming about being an ally, so that they can be on the court and in action.
Hi, my name is Edie, and thank you for having me back. I've been with Reset Race on a couple of shows, and I live in Southern California. I'm from Middle Georgia, and I'm just a lone activist looking for a place. Besides reparations, I'm in reparations now, so that's my place. And then I also like the Poor People's Campaign. So, and I'm here because I met Samantha and I saw ADOS a few years ago, and I'm looking forward to working with y'all on reparations. Thank you.
Awesome. All right. So who am I missing? I feel like, did I do Gabriel? Okay, let's do Gabriel, and after that we'll do.
Hey everybody, good Good day to you. My name is Gabriel Piemonte. I am a reparationist. I am a Caucasian pessimist or cracker pessimist, as you prefer. I can't possibly be with the CIA because I'm Italian American. I'm happy to be here and happy to see all of your beautiful faces.
All hail King Killmonger. It is I, the rightful ruler of Wakanda. T'Challa cheated. Y'all saw it. Y'all all saw it. Anywho, I'm here to get you white allies right. We can get a few more. Let's get you guys on the winning team.
Yeah, for real. Definitely need to get them on the winning team. Alrighty then. So, okay, sorry, because the screen moves as people talk. So, did we get everybody? Oh no, let me get Mud. Mud's back in the box.
Is he back?
So, I'm going to switch Josiah down. That's the thing. Only 10 of us can be on screen at a time. So it's like Hollywood Squares. All right, go ahead, Mud. Since you got dropped off.
Yeah, I don't know what happened. But yeah, they call me Mud.
Technology.
They call me Mud. I've been in the reparation space for the past few years now. You can find me on all my social media.
Too much truth.
CIA
will not have it.
There's a truth limit.
Yeah. We've exceeded it.
I can assure you the CIA didn't have anything to do with that one. Don't
and how would you know, Doc?
I can assure you the CIA had nothing to do with that one.
No, I can assure you.
I'm deep on this.
It keeps kicking me out. I don't know what's going on.
It does.
This is Mud when he's on Clubhouse. He always says the truth, and then the moderators kick him down midway because he's always telling the truth.
But I'm gonna try it this third time. They call me Mud. You can find me on all my social media at Of Lineage. That's Twitter, Instagram, and Clubhouse. I've been in the reparation space for the past 3 years. I created the Bitter Dose TV show, and I am a co-host of Reset Race. Oh, I finally got through it. All right.
You made it. Okay, last but not least, I'm Samantha Angelique. I'm a host of Reset Race. I am co-host of this show. We love the network. We love you people. And we're going to get to it because our technical difficulties have wasted a whole hour of our whole panel's lives. And I love them. So we're going to get going. I'm going to bring Sasha up because today's topic is how to build community. And I really wanted Sasha to kind of talk to us a little bit about institution building, but also like the need for building institutions and also building different types of institutions. I feel like you can speak to that. Let me pull you back up.
So I am someone who's. Go ahead. Is someone else speaking?
No, you're done. I'm going to turn myself on mute.
Okay, that's fine. So I'm interested in community, in part because I'm a former social scientist who's moved into futurism, which is another branch of social science. And one of the things that we've had a problem with that a really good book I recommend everyone read is called Bowling Alone by Robert Putnam actually found since the 1980s, there has been a general decline in civic engagement and in communities, either people being engaged in their communities by joining organizations since really the 1980s. And there's a couple factors he found for that are things like people working more, women were in the workplace more, and some generational changes. So we've had a real breakdown of community across the board, across all races. And of course, this has impacted different groups very strongly. But the group, of course, I'm most qualified and the one I'm most focused on is helping Black Americans, and specifically descendants of American chattel slavery, which are people that we would consider legacy Black Americans that were part of the slave trade and freed after the Civil War to rebuild our communities because we had some unique issues with that. Some unique issues that we've had is we have had issues where we have formed different types of organizations and people have attempted to destroy those organizations historically. We've had issues where various different tragedies or what we call mass atrocities or genocidal events have actually prevented from my community from actually building healing communities. So it's really becomes important within my group as a way to kind of make sure that we have a continuity of our identity and our community character and culture to actually rebuild those things. I do work as a futurist to give people resources to build different kinds of community. I've helped people build agrarian type communities, whether it's helping people with intentional community work or helping people with actually building community gardens, which are also helpful. But I also teach people on how to do these things with maintaining and actually creating groups for culture and dealing with issues of cultural appropriation because as a futurist, we know that globalization, and I'm also something else called a communitarian, that these things are becoming more important and to help people get the resources to take care of that themselves and to actually begin engagement is actually part of healing America. So it's really a big passion of mine that I have been really delving into and actually starting to teach people more on. So my question is, in terms of community, because we all actually represent different communities in this group, what are ways that you think that communities have fallen since you, or have they not fallen? If you think it's okay if you don't think that they've actually become less engaged, they're still strong. And what do you think there are ways we can actually heal and deal with that? Because I think that is honestly an American problem. I agree with Putnam on this.
As a non-American or someone who came here when I was 21, but people talk a lot about community here, but I have never experienced anything remotely resembling the kind of community that I had at home. So I don't know if that's because, I grew up in a certain environment and I knew everybody growing up, from elementary school, kindergarten, you name it. But I feel that it's this whole, hyper-capitalist, what is it called? Upward mobility and whatever BS that's causing people here in this country to not have any roots anywhere. Like
You're in
people
the
keep
worst
moving.
places for this. You've lived in probably two of the worst. Between New York City, right? You were there before, and now you're in Berkeley.
Yeah, I mean, since I moved here to California, I moved 11 times since 2003.
Those are the places. What's good about that for you is you have tremendous insight now about how we destroy people's ability to have empathy for each other and live in community. But you're not seeing. I mean, I think there are lots of neighborhoods and parts of the country where there still is community. I think by and large, these are fairly ethnically homogenous places. So, I think for me, the South Side of Chicago is the most kind of community-based, rooted place I've lived in since my childhood, and the North End of Boston, which was mostly Italian American. So I had to move from one predominantly ethnic group, Italian Americans, to another predominantly Black area. And I don't know. I mean, I think we should talk about whether there's the possibility of, convergence among ethnicities that still has community. But I think you hit it the nail on the head. It's where you started from. You grew up there. You had years where you're connected to people, probably all living in the same place. I don't know. I'm sure that Sasha has lots of thoughts about how we grow it, where it works and where it doesn't work.
I want to hear some other insights on this one, but I think I love what your point that you made about where you lived and about the point about upward mobility and that push for that destroyed community, because that's one of Putnam's big points that he makes in his work and the studies that he's done, is that the need for hyper careerism in America has actually destroyed community. Has anyone really, besides her, experienced that? where you think that people that you lived in a community with or were around, or even neighbors, that people were so focused on that kind of a thing that it destroyed any sense of community that could be built?
You know, I have a feeling that in this sense, yes, because there are so many people who are willing to cut the throats of other people to get ahead, and a lot of the very first people they see is their neighbors. For example, where I grew up at, northern Indiana, it was generally a working class, uh, you would say like a subdivision, and everybody there who lived there they all worked at the steel mill, and they worked at different jobs within the steel mill. But there was a recession in 1982 where most of the people who lived there were laid off, and I mean it was tremendous. It was like 18 months of no work for anybody in the area, and so some of the people in the neighborhood decided that they were going to try to like start a neighborhood store, so that people could, they wouldn't have to go to the, the huge store, 15 miles away. They could shop here in the neighborhood and, maybe get some discounts or whatever. And, you're basically supporting your neighborhood and economic development within your neighborhood. And there were some people who were friends with developers in other parts of the area who, went and had the sheriff come and shut places like that down simply because of the fact that they couldn't tolerate any kind of competition to their friends' business elsewhere. And because they still had money and they still had work, they still had connections with, the law enforcement. They actually destroyed that part of the community in order to keep, the competition from hurting members of their own class, essentially. It was to their class's advantage to shut down these community institutions that were starting to develop.
Ooh, that
Powerful
brings
story.
something to mind. That's a
Yeah.
great story. So, do you think that your example is a cautionary tale of what not to do, or is it a cautionary tale that if anyone tries to build something, that they should watch out for that?
Well, I would say in that case it was probably a cautionary tale of what will happen if you actually try to build a community in that. I mean, you have historical examples all over the place of people who are of different communities trying to get together and work together and have some solidarity, and then like cops coming in and shutting it all down, or like rich people inciting race riots against places like in Tulsa or wherever. You see examples of whites and blacks working together to try to form unions or co-ops and stuff like that. And so the community will actually turn against you if you actually try to start building institutions, if those things don't match. This is really ad hoc theorizing here. If those things don't match the prevailing social class structure, if they kind of go against that class or caste structure of that community. If
Oh,
that makes sense.
thank you for making that point. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's one of my favorite books I actually teach from. It's called A Paradise Built in Hell by Rebecca Solnit. And one of the points that she makes in the book, and the book is about natural disasters and how governments are often inefficient or useless during natural disasters, and that people are actually much better at actually managing their communities and handling these things when these stuff happen. So I'm wondering, during this period of time that we're having, issues with both natural disasters and a pandemic, do you see this growth in mutual aid that we have for one another in the middle of this crisis continuing to build a bigger momentum and movement, or do you think it's just going to be a stopgap during this time period?
Well, I think that anything we do without structural reform is a stopgap. So you need structural reform on a number of different levels. You need it on economic levels. You need it on cultural or racial levels. You need, structural reform and structural revolution even on a whole number of different levels. Otherwise, everything you do is just a Band-Aid trying to stop a hemorrhage. And, as you see, Band-Aids are very quickly overwhelmed by
Right.
massive hemorrhages like that.
Can I
So,
May I
just?
chime in quickly, or?
Oh,
go for it.
Sasha, it's just interesting. You just mentioned something that I was thinking about this week. I've just been noticing in several cities, and I've been doing some traveling lately, that mutual aid seems to have increased generally, and just even on social media posts and in activist spaces, there's more, at least, talk, and I see movement on community fridges. Even in the public schools that are coming back, you even hear these stories about even students getting free pantries together. So I've just been noticing that I guess there is a trend. I guess we're seeing the same trend. And When I was on Clubhouse the other day, which I'm a big fan of, they have these white ally spaces, and there is this kind of vibe I noticed where, we're just kind of sick of. I think people are noticing the talking and the quote unquote activism hasn't worked, and there's a lot of people that are just saying mutual aid is what we have to do right now. And I don't know if you felt that same vibe, but I think you're onto something, and it's interesting you notice it because I've been noticing this week that there's even some very intense exchanges in some of these rooms and some of these activist spaces where it's like, we all have to do mutual aid work right now. So I like to agree with you and hope that it's a trend for the future, because I think it's really good and something that we could financially support. And it might seem like a band-aid to some, but for a lot of people it's a backpack for a kid, or food and things like that. So I agree with it, and I don't know if anybody else has seen similar trends in their cities, especially throughout the pandemic. So I just wanted to say that.
Can I interject real quick here?
Yeah, and I'll go after you, Doc.
Sure. This is on the front of my mind with things like mutual aid. It's obviously very good work, and it's very immediate work, and it's very personal work, and it's like a one-on-one type of thing, and it really benefits people individually. But when we do things like this is the unpopular opinion about this, I think. So I'm going to go out on a limb and stick my neck out here. When we do things like this, we sort of alleviate the need of the society to take care of our own. We give people an excuse to say, well, we don't have to have free food in society anymore because we got 50 mutual aid groups that are doing it, or charities even. We don't have to promote free housing because we got a charity that does rental assistance, and we don't have to rein in the utilities because we got all these charities that drop $50 or $100 on people every single month to help pay their bills. So at what point do we as a society say, look, the charities aren't enough, they're not ending any of the problems that they're trying to help with? We need a society level, a state level answer to these problems, to either cut prices down or put caps on rent or something like that, in order to force a dramatic change in a permanent change in the lives of people, where they don't have to go back every single month to the mutual aid society and try to get another check.
So
they don't have to worry about
I get in here? I want to get in on this one. Can I get in real quick?
Tried
So
all this
this is
stuff.
so let me get in here real quick. So am I unmuted? Okay.
No.
You
I
are.
hear you.
Okay, perfect. So I look at setting up the mutual aid societies as an organizing tool, right? Because you keep saying, how do we get people together to actually fight the system for real change, right? The mutual aid is how you get people to come together, because I may not want to listen to you just sit and preach at me, but if there's some type of service or something going on, then over time I'm more interested in what you're talking about. And once you start getting people together in their community and they start looking around and noticing the problems, then from there the political groups can spur out and fight for the things that need to be fixed in the community. Because I see it multifaceted like you do too, right? But I think we think of everything on a federal level, but I think the federal level should be funding the communities, right? Because a community that comes together and actually figures out what's needed for that community would know better than the Fed. But we need the Fed to fund it, if that makes sense.
What happens when you find your view in the minority? Like, for example, when the community decides we're not going to give school to poor people, and they can't do shit about it because they don't pay any taxes. Which is what happens in a lot of communities where they don't fund schools for poor people because the poor people don't have any political power.
But the mutual aid community, but the point about mutual aid communities is it's supposed to be in your community. So if you get a bunch of poor people together, they're not going to vote not to fund their schools.
Right.
But you'll get enough of those people together to start fighting towards because this is the thing, at least for me, the more affluent areas are better organized to get what they want politically. The poor people, we're not even coming together to even fight to have a conversation in the first place.
But that's because they're working and they don't have time to organize. Like, they're surviving. There's an issue when you can't feed your family. Who's running the country doesn't really matter, because you're trying to feed your family and medicate yourself, and get back and forth to work. So the
Right.
failure of our federal government to provide a floor under which no one falls is the reason that mutual aid societies are popping up in the middle of a pandemic, because our country fucking sucks. Like,
But it's all.
they
But I'll
told
go one.
people to stay home and then gave them at the most $3,000 for 2 years. Like, that's supposed to do something, and then they spent $6 trillion on their best rich friends.
But
Mm-hmm.
the other factor that we're not taking into account, I think some of you don't completely understand what mutual aid is. I'm looking at the definition that Peter Kropotkin came up with for mutual aid. Mutual aid, and Ben Shepherd pointed out, it's not charity. People give what they can and get what they need. So it's actually like, I would say mutual aid is not charity. Mutual aid is low tech anarchists co-ops. And
Well,
But
in
that's
theory, that's nice, but that's
but
not.
surely you'll agree that there's more need than there is resources to meet that need. You know.
right. And that's where I say the next thing I would like to actually get into a little bit, because this is something that's a growth area, um, is cooperatives. Has anyone here ever actually taken place in a cooperative or found them useful to helping build a community?
Absolutely. Yeah, I've been on the board of a housing cooperative. I helped found a financial cooperative, and yeah, the South Side of Chicago is one of the kind of epicenters in the United States of cooperative development, and it's not. I don't think it gets the attention it deserves, because Black folks were part of the driving force behind it. So it doesn't fit the narrative of kind of, it's not the New Deal narrative. Um, I couldn't agree with you more, Sasha. Definitely excited to hear what you have to say about co-ops. They're critical to whatever we're going to do going forward.
Right. Does anyone, and I also understand, we've talked a lot about communities that we lived in. Has anyone found one of the forms of community, one of the oldest forms of community that we actually had in society, even de Tocqueville talks about that, is actually religious communities. Has anyone found that either they grew up in or were somewhat associated with a religious community that actually offered not only a sense of community, but a sense of being able to form organizations that are useful to themselves and other parts, outside people?
The Nation of Islam is the
Yes,
best organization on earth, the best religious organization on earth, because they provide food, they provide education, they train as far as nutrition and what to eat to sustain your life. They are doing mediation work all over the country as far as squashing beefs. Minister Farrakhan has gone and did the East Coast West Coast beef and worked out the differences in the older generation. They go into prisons. They provide security in their neighborhoods. They reduce crime. So yeah, the Nation of Islam is by far the best organization around.
amazing organization.
Right. I've also found that in my case, I have actually benefited because I'm Jewish. There are various different groups that have actually built very strong cooperative, whether it's cooperative living situations, because I've actually stayed in actual ones that have been built by different groups of organizations on that subject. I'm also studying with them right now, because I'm actually, one of the things I'm going to be doing in the next 5-year goals here is I'm actually going to be talking to various different groups of people who have formed different types of cooperatives, simply because the lack of education on this topic to younger people is kind of daunting. And the other factor on this is going to become more necessary, because I don't know if you guys have been keeping up with the latest data, but the ability for the average person to buy their own home is going to be greatly diminished in a lot of American cities. So cooperatives could possibly be a way of actually working around that problem, because whether it's consumer co-ops where groups of people buy things, or neighborhood co-ops where people actually buy land and actually build properties that people are affordable housing. I know the Institute for Intentional Communities is actually offering scholarships, if you know anyone, for communities of color, for people to actually study with them so they can actually form their own communities, because they're trying to grow the number of actual intentional communities and cooperative living spaces for communities of color in the United States.
Sasha, I think it's no coincidence that the South Side is as fertile a ground as it is for co-ops, and it is a very, very vibrant Jewish community here, and the heart of the nation, really. I mean, this is the Nation of Islam's. I mean, I wouldn't say which mosque is bigger than another one, but certainly this is a very important.
It's the headquarters.
Location. Yeah, it's important here. I mean, the nation is everywhere. If you stand at a bus stop here and start talking about the nation, if there are more than 3 people there, someone is affiliated with the nation, and it's hard to not have a conversation about community development without some member, whether it's a synagogue or just a Jewish person who is very active in some effort. So these cultures are critical, and this is kind of goes back to building community, to what we were talking about initially, that when the cultures are ruptured, then you eviscerate the possibility of this kind of building. And I think that's the challenge we have here, and why reparations is so critical, is that, okay, so these are great ideas. Why haven't they been implemented? Well, actually they have been, and then they're destroyed. Why are they destroyed? Because the Black community cannot have economic capacity in order for this country to operate the way it operates. It has to be ruptured economically. And when you're doing that to communities, when that's part of the modus operandi of the society, then these ideas, they'll grow, they'll build, but what they're going to do is they're going to be very successful. So there's mutual aid all over the South Side of Chicago. Where is it most effective? Where is it most visible? Hyde Park, the richest, whitest neighborhood on the South Side of Chicago. And that's going to always be the case until you deal with the root causes, the basic problem, which is the foundational injustice, the basic thing that makes it possible for us to have the affluence we have, which is stolen wealth from centuries of labor, and of course stolen land as well.
And I'm from Austin, Texas, and Austin is a flush on the white side of town with co-ops. Yeah. And the east side of town, which was the Black community, has been run off because of gentrification. So it's hard to build a community, like Gabriel said, when the government can just come in through eminent domain, take your stuff, like they were trying to do in New York for Jeff Bezos to make a new warehouse for me to order my Amazon stuff. Like, I'm the spouse of a retired sergeant, and we've been negatively impacted by COVID because we got COVID. But prior to us getting sick, we didn't miss a beat because of my husband's retirement and his disability pay. We didn't have to worry about being homeless or not having food or not, having our lights shut off. But that's not the case for everybody. And when our nation is, its job, I guess it's decided, its manifest destiny is to not just destroy communities around the world, but it destroys its own white communities when it takes the jobs that anchor that community away. I live in Hinesville, Georgia, and the military base is the anchor of this community. There are 7 cities in my county. And if the military base goes away, this town shrivels up like a raisin and dies. And so we always, every couple of years, when someone is being elected, the thing that the retirees want to make sure is that whoever gets elected mayor knows how to hobnob to keep this base open. Because if the base goes, the whole community is gone.
So here's my question to those of you, especially at emphasis on the commenters of color. How do we maintain communities when it seems like people who have less economic capital are often the sacrificial lambs to economic decisions made by elites on this, because this is a pattern. We talked about with white communities, we're hearing about this with black communities. So what are some successes? Does anyone know any successful strategies or actually successful cases where people fought these things off? Because this seems to be a recurring pattern in what we're discussing.
I think the communities continue to exist. They're just dilapidated. They're just like people that can't afford to move, like the people that live in the hollers of Kentucky. They're still a community. They still live and do what they do, but their infrastructure is gone. Look at Detroit. The infrastructure is gutted in Midwestern communities, but the people remain because they can't go anywhere. So communities still exist. They are just not thriving communities necessarily.
And again, doesn't this come back to a lack of organization amongst ourselves, right? So this is the thing. In poor communities, most people are not going to be able to attend those city council meetings and stuff like that during the daytime. We got retirees. Why aren't we talking to our elders about them going to the meetings and letting us know what goes on? And then they tell the young folks, and the young folks go knock everybody else's doors and ring the alarm. We just don't. We have to get back to the basics, because we can't do anything until we organize each other. Like, we can't, because we don't have the numbers. We've already seen that nobody's responding to us in the numbers that we're doing right now. Nobody cares. The oligarchs aren't responding. The politicians aren't responding. So it's about getting a large enough group together that we can actually make demands and be taken seriously.
But I also think, Sam, that the needs of the elderly are not the needs of the young. I mean, we saw
But
that
I'm
with
not saying, but the thing about it is, you have to remember, after slavery, when our men could vote, men, women, and child sat in churches and talked about who would be voted on. Okay, so it's not about
right.
grandma's needs. Grandma needs to go back to being part of a community and thinking about her children and her grandchildren as well. That all goes back to how we interact and deal with each other, especially for Black folks, since crack that fucked up our communities. Like,
Yeah,
really
no, I
bad.
agree with that. I also think
Joe
though too
Biden's
that the
laws.
church is
Mhm.
bankrupt. and and the church used to be the center of community, especially to organize us to be able to vote. But when they are I think the church has been captured, and the Black church specifically is weak. They all just voted in Biden and sent, while they watch their children be ravished in the crack epidemic, grandma and grandpa went and voted for Joe Biden. So I think that it's a lack of education. I think it's a generational thing. I
I
think
agree.
that when we as young people, I know when I was talking to my elders about Joe Biden and how horrible he was, I was told I needed to be seen and not heard and to stop talking, and I was just
Ooh.
stupid, and I would learn when I got older.
Okay, so I'm I'm not sure. I agree with Danette what she said, and for that reason, I say um, the Black community of elders might be the same as the white community of elders, where they vote in their own best interest. They're not worried about us, like, and that's exactly what I've been told for the past 3 years: is step down and shut up and just do what they say.
My
And
question is to everyone. Do you think that the traumas of what happened, because America had some of the best civil society and community engagement during the civil rights movement, but do you think that the trauma of what happened to the civil rights leaders and the trauma of what happened, the directed like genocidal actions within various communities, do you think that's really ultimately what destroyed a lot of our community and why we've struggled so much to bring it back
Yeah,
when they
fear.
just put it back to work?
Fear. That's how I feel about Reverend Barber. That's why I think he won't go as far as he needs to, because he grew up in a generation where he watched everybody get murdered. Mm-hmm. And Doc, I know you had your hand up, so if you would.
Well, I was actually going to speak to that, and I would like to give some credit to the people that were out protesting in the streets. I mean, there were hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of people out there. It was one of the biggest social protests that we've seen in more than a generation. Even was bigger than the anti-war stuff in the early 2000s. And so we got to give some credit to the fact that there are people who are organized. There are people who are organizing, and there are people who are very conscious of this stuff and are trying to do something about it. And yet it seems that the more that they organize, the oligarchs do take notice. It's not that they're ignoring you, it's that they're responding to people who are in the streets with tear gas and rubber bullets. And, to me, that says that, something's getting through. Something's getting through when they feel like they got to put the riot police out in the streets to deal with a peaceful protest about justice and racial equality and that kind of stuff. Something's getting through. And so I just wanted to make sure that we give credit to the people who were out there doing that stuff, because, like I said, it was the largest social protest in the generation. And, more stuff along that line and better organization along that line could possibly point to a way forward in tandem with the mutual aid and stuff like that you guys are talking about.
And I think you're right, Doc, that the other side of that is not just that those people work very hard, but that the government works awfully hard. It takes a lot of resources to keep things as screwed up as they are. And that's another thing that Solnit, the author Sasha was referencing earlier, points out in her book, A Paradise Built in Hell, is not just that people in disaster will naturally come together, but that government or powerful people will then respond to people coming together and smash it. That's the impulse. And that's especially the impulse when any of those folks in those combinations are Black folks. Because in America, there's a sense of alarm whenever Black folks are seen organizing, that everything's going to fall apart. And I think that's right, in fact. If you're a white supremacist, you are correct to be alarmed and concerned about what's been happening in America over the last several decades, because your time is running out. And so it makes sense that responses are more and more extreme. It makes sense that our urban police forces are military forces now and have military equipment. It makes sense because we're in a very serious battle. The problem is that the other side understands that, and we're still kind of trying to get it together.
I would argue that that's on purpose, and I will argue one other thing. One of the other points I loved about that book with A Paradise Built in Hell with Rebecca Solnit is that the elite people hate disasters because it shows how incompetent they are. So what ways do you see people, even in light of the era of growing understanding community and mutual aid, in which ways do you see people kind of acting a little askew that are not part of the masses about the fact that there is growing need for community and people using it? Because this is really normal when this stuff happens. Because we had it happening at once. We have natural disasters like Ida happening and the stuff happening, the tower grid in Texas, plus COVID. I mean, they're really looking incompetent now. They're shaking their boots. They look bad.
Good question.
Well, that's what, I'm not sure I followed everything perfectly, but that's why we had to get the country back to working again, right, to cover that up. And I think when I look at my friends back in the South who are, under no mask mandates in school and stuff like that, like everybody's just, it's been normalized. Everything just seems normalized to me. Like, I'm still keeping my kid home because he's not vaccinated. And everybody I know back there is just living their life.
Can I just quickly interject, kind of take us back to the beginning of the conversation when we were talking about community? I've often wondered, the fact that we ship the elderly to retirement homes, the degree of damage to the community that has done. Because, where are the old, wise people or just grandparents who can take care of the kids? I like kindergartens and daycare and all that. They're very expensive here. And, I think there used to be a lot more fluidity between generations and this kind of tight-knit community. But now that the old people are, just thrown away, I feel like that's really created a big rift on a deep level. And again, that's capitalism is to blame there. Like, how do we repair that?
And well, I think that goes deeper because we have to talk about a whole generation of parents that deserve to be thrown away. That's a whole different kind of conversation. But I'm not saying the whole generation, but I'm saying a lot of those parents weren't good parents to their kids, and that's why they're throwing them in the.
Let me tell you, they sent a whole bunch of us home. We're called latchkey kids, and we spent every afternoon by ourselves. So.
That was me.
And they're sitting on those old retirement plans from the 60s. They're like, oh, yeah, life is good. Get your ass up and work,
Lazy. Y'all are lazy.
Kids.
When I was a kid, I worked and went to school. Yeah, you worked at a burger joint and paid for 4 years of college. Fuck you.
When I was 19, I had 2 houses.
Are Black people sending their elderly to retirement homes?
We can't afford that shit. That's rich white people shit.
Yeah, that ain't my experience. My grandfather was.
Your sound is way too low.
Can you hear me now?
Come closer.
Better, but come closer.
My grandparents, we went to my part of it. So on my mother's side, my grandmother died from Alzheimer's and dementia. So she wasn't in a space to deal with grandkids and great-grand. She just wasn't. On my biological father's side of the family, they came to them after school. Like, they went to the school that was in my grandparents' neighborhood, and after school they went to my grandparents' house. I didn't, because I lived in a different state. And then with my stepfather, he had health issues and wasn't able to take care of grandkids. So I think that the experience of community, when you're talking Black community versus white community, is a very different experience. I mean, we have generations, like my mother-in-law raises her grandkids. My mom raised 2 of her grandkids, and my sister raised 2 of my nieces. So like, we have a strong family unit. We talk every day. I'm out of state, but they're with each other all the time. So I think the experience of community, if we're talking on a familial level, it's still intact within the Black community. Even in the middle of a dilapidated, crack-infested neighborhood, you still have the familial community there. Now, community on the level of Hinesville as a starting point, we all rally together around the military, but I do think that capitalism has ravished our country, whether it's all the deployments and the mental health issues that the military community deals with, the suicides, the domestic violence, there's a high percentage of white men that are now joining white supremacist groups out of the military. I mean, there's a lot of craziness happening. So America is sick. Minister Farrakhan wrote a book and said that America is on her deathbed. And
Fannie Lou Hamer was saying that too. Fannie Lou Hamer was saying that a long time ago. Mud, I want you to get in here because I ain't heard enough of you.
Well, you probably haven't heard any of me because the thing keeps kicking me out.
I noticed. I keep throwing you back in here.
Silence.
We may just end up getting a Zoom panel.
I have a Zoom account, Sam. I have a Zoom account that you guys can use that's paid for.
That's what's up.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to say this. I don't know if this has kind of been covered. I think we kind of touched on the gentrification thing, but I think the issue that a lot of us are having is the fact that we have community, but we're not within proximity of each other, like the people that we consider to be in our community. And part of that is because just our living arrangements are like in the modern America are different, especially if you're a renter. You're only in a location for maybe 2-3 years before you move to another location. And for a lot of people, that could be moving to another town. You know, that could be, you know, like if you have to move closer to a new job that you got, if you got to move closer to a new school, you know, and that's where it seems like it's hard for people to find roots in like their local community, especially like to do politics, because that might not be their community in the next couple of years. So why get invested?
Yeah.
That's
It's like how when Ida was talking about how she lived 11 places and she's been in the country. Like that's
Yeah,
a
and
lot.
you know, my mom is 80 now, and she is all alone in Croatia. Sorry.
And that's what capitalism does, right? It displaces us. You know, and I think it's true that there aren't the same kind of senior centers. There are these Lux, like in the Hyde Park neighborhood in on the south side, which is what the University of Chicago, where they kind of run things. There's a senior building, senior facility that it costs $500,000 to get into. Then you start paying. Then you start paying a monthly fee.
Oh yeah, no, I looked into that because you know I'm a striver, so that was one of the things I was a striver. That was one of the things on my list, retirement facilities, because my family has like 160 acres of land in Arkansas, and I was like, mow that bad boy down, build a beautiful lake like in what's my movie, The Notebook, and have a whole retirement community around a gorgeous lake with a fishing pond. Yep,
it's big money. Now on the other hand,
a lot of people are making that move.
On the other hand, there are senior buildings in the neighborhoods outside of Hyde Park, the black neighborhoods, but it's not the same thing. That's for people. First of all, they start at 50 years old. So a senior building for white people is like you're 70, 75, and you're taking some of your savings, a fraction of it, and giving them $500,000. In my neighborhood, you can, if you're 50 or older, you can go into what was originally designated as a senior building. But these are for people. Really, this is the stuff that the damage that's done in predominantly black neighborhoods to people, and you can't. Your family literally can't take care of the problems you have. That's what they're for. It's like it's not that anybody wants to put you in a building and forget about you. It's more like literally you need around the clock care because you have so many ailments and problems that it's not possible. So
I had a friend who had to put her grandmother into a facility because she had Alzheimer's, because they literally kept track of her until the point that it became unsafe to keep her.
Right.
And it still broke their hearts to have to do it.
Yeah, even that's different. It's right. It's not the same thing. It's like nobody wants to do it. Where you got white folks being like, "Bye, grandma." You know,
Give
it's
me
like
that
good
house.
news.
Give me that house. I've been waiting to get this house.
We were in Chicago. We had the polls for kids going back to school last school year. It was overwhelmingly white people were like, "Send our kids back. We know you don't have protocols yet. We know that the rates are still going through the roof. Send our white kids back." And black and brown parents were like, "Please do not, remote learning is fine for now till we figure this out." Guess what the mayor did?
Exactly. And we ain't got no computers. We barely got internet. All these white people got tablets, internet, fast internet.
In Berkeley,
remote tutors.
In Berkeley, Berkeley school district was giving these what are they called, Chromebooks to all the kids who didn't have any, and they even gave what is it called, this little hut spots. So this was all organized by Berkeley City. It really worked for everyone.
Very nice. Very nice there. It's
well, the country has the resources. That's the whole kind of sick joke about all these discussions. This government can very easily put all these retirement centers in all these cities.
Absolutely.
And when we quote unquote get the reparations paid in our lifetime, and get these checks going, that's what's going to happen to the communities. But the government can so easily do that, and it has done it, as Gabe mentioned, in certain communities. In my state, Connecticut, is very obvious on the public school side. You'll have literally a town called West Hartford, You look it up, the best school ratings ever, and then you Google East Hartford, where Trump's Secretary of Education actually singled out East Hartford High and called it this shithole high school and everything, literally right next to each other. So this government has all the resources it needs. There was just a New York Times article a couple days ago saying that all the economists of the past 30 years had no clue that basically you just invent money out of thin air. So we have the money for all these things. That's the sick joke,
Yep.
Sorry,
poverty is a choice. No, thank you for saying that. Poverty is a government policy choice, period. Right. The reason why we have people dying every night homeless in the street is because the government chooses for that to happen. The reason why we have people dying of all types of illnesses is because the government chooses for it to happen. That's what it is.
Right.
It is what it is.
Just look at Manchin and Cinema now. It's like money in politics is the poison, that's just killing us all and the planet and our children, everything. I mean, I
gotta give it
I can't take it anymore.
Give it to the folks of West Virginia who was in those kayaks. Talking about what you doing to our bill. But I like that because I'm changing my wording behind it since January 6th, but all public officials in this country should be pariahs.
Could you just go down to the corner for an hour? How about it's my daughter's wedding? Just for an hour. Just let her get married, please. This person is not my daughter. My daughter's getting married.
Will you tell her that?
Did you invite Senator?
I don't know. Listen, tell her that we don't like what she's doing to our country.
How about you invite this woman?
You know what? Tell her.
Corrupting the whole country.
Tell her.
I don't disagree with any of you people with your point of view and your rights. It's my daughter's wedding.
So throw her out.
Please just go down to the corner for 1 hour.
You should not be able to go to the grocery store you should either be shunned or people should tell you what they think about you and what they're not doing for their community. You shouldn't be able to go to your granddaughter's recital because they'll be embarrassed for you to be there because of the type of anger and disrespect that you'll receive. I don't believe anybody should put their hands on anybody, but I think you should be shunned.
Yes,
Yep.
absolutely.
And I think if that started happening, I think people would move a little bit different because it's great to have all that money, but there's only so many rich people and they only let so many people in their immediate circles. So at some point, and if you can't get the people to do anything with you anymore, you are no longer valid or useful. Like I said, everything that we need to do comes back to us organizing, getting people together.
I do have to mention though that the Joe Manchin problem is, it's not just talking voters. It's changing the machine in West Virginia. It's not like.
No, but this is my thing. You can't change the machine in West Virginia until you get enough voters. Like, again, the problem with us is we do chicken before the egg, right? Or like it's the cart before the horse, right? Like how can you change the system if you can't get your politicians to listen to you? And you can't get your politicians to listen to till you have enough people who can vote them in or out.
Right.
When you can show them a petition with 10,000 people that they can go back through and call, who are saying, listen, next election, if you don't do A, B, and C, we're going to vote against you. When you can have 10,000 people in a community, like you've told me, calling these offices, but 5, 6 people doing that, 10 people doing that does not move them.
Yeah.
You have to get numbers to the point that you can actually do something for them. Like you can't change a system without numbers. That's why none of this is working. And if you
Right.
look at the points in the country when you actually got anything, the civil rights movement, the New Deal, the freaking Great Society, which is still the civil rights movement, it's all the same time. Like, people were massively organized. The war movement, when the anti-war movement in the 60s, there was a massive amount of people who came together. It wasn't just a small little group of people. People were coming together all over the country.
I know, but with the New Deal, you actually had people in the government that wanted to do it, like Francis
Yeah, but
Perkins.
why?
We
Because if
don't
you
have
remember, it
those.
came to a point where white people were running up in rich white people's homes and killing and stealing. There was some motivation behind it.
They
Right.
wanted to stop communism. That's why
Right.
they
Yeah.
gave us. Yeah.
Let me say, if we're going to start to think about politicians and their motivation, that at least my working assumption is they're unreliable, they're dishonest, they're self-interested, they will lie to you every time. You may meet an individual who's in politics who's a good person. I have a dear friend who's right now a city councilor here in Chicago. In my mind, I'm not including her when I think this. That does not stop me from operationally any plans I make, even if I'm approaching city council. I'm assuming the vast majority of people I'm dealing with are liars. They only care about their own self-interest. They're doing whatever they can do to make sure they stay in that position of power. So you can't to look backwards and say, well, maybe at this time people cared more about civil rights. Our best bet is to assume they did not care about one other person that wasn't inside their house when they went home at night, that they were doing it because there was some kind of motivation that made them feel like they had to do it. And it was probably pretty, petty in the end, like probably not anything deep, probably like they've convinced me I'm going to get voted out. And so I'm going to start acting like I really care about this stuff. I really think that part of it is that we should assume the worst of people.
But doesn't it go back to what Yvette used to say, right? You got to have wind behind your back. Perfect example, Nina Turner. I think Nina Turner with wind behind her back would be great. I think Nina Turner without a movement and wind behind her back is going to be mediocre as fuck.
Right.
But would I rather have a Nina Turner in office who, if I can get enough people and get wind behind her back, she'll fight for me, versus me having somebody else that if I get wind behind their back, we gonna have to fight them tooth and nail to get what we need, versus somebody who would be more open to my needs. But again, like I said, I don't trust anybody. This isn't a personal thing with her. I'm just using her as an example.
These aren't our friends.
Because she's a person that we know believes in a lot of things that we believe, but she'll believe them more if you have a whole group of people behind her that can push her. And not only do you need a bunch of people behind her that can push her, you need a bunch of people that are in these other districts pushing their Congress people to do stuff. We can't just focus on and I fucking hate AOC, but I don't live in that bitch's district. And I'm not moving to New York or going to stay in New York to organize her district against her. I got people in my own backyard that I'm not officially in their district that I can drive to that I gotta slay. I gotta fucking get rid of Karen Bass from trying to be fucking mayor. Like, I got work to do. So that's my problem. Like, everybody wants to focus on people who are not in their district. What the fuck is your congressperson doing? My congressperson isn't doing shit for Black or Latinos, and she's a fucking Latina. Okay.
And mine is Barbara Lee.
So
that's all you need to say.
That's the thing. Like, it's easy for you to be like, well, AOC isn't doing this in her district. Well, what is your congressperson not doing in your district? And I'm not the person who says that electoral politics is the end all and the be all. It's a tool, like everything else. It's a tool. But if you don't have enough people, you can't access the tool because we don't have the money.
Yeah,
so the only
I
thing
think political education is integral to building community like that.
Right.
So I mean, the more people know, the more knowledge they have, the more willing they'll be to make decisions that are in their best interest, I think. So.
And I think we, one thing it's not sexy, so it's never really pushed, but people, especially poor people, who don't have a lot of education, need to be educated on the mechanics of voting.
Can
like
we say
you
that
know,
all people need to be? Because I know a
well,
lot of middle class people that don't know shit about shit.
Absolutely.
true.
And they
just
got
work
degrees.
for them. They don't
maybe
have to
younger
work.
people. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
it's the like in California, trying to vote, as an independent, trying to vote for somebody running on the Democratic presidential ballot is like, there's this technocratic complexity serves as voter suppression.
That's
like
why
you have to.
that's why I'm a Democrat in California. Because
Well,
if not, you have to literally request the ballot every election,
exactly.
or else you
I
can't.
spent
It's a
months and
hassle.
months and months, educating the Bernie campaign and trying to get them to do something. I mean, it was just mind numbing. This one little thing, cost. It cost him at least 400,000 votes in 2016 because people do not know how to vote, just what ballot to request and when and what to do with it. Simple stuff, but
that's by
like that.
design.
Yeah,
It's
absolutely,
done on
absolutely, absolutely.
The reason why
done on
Stacey
purpose, and it's
Abrams
done by the
is so.
Dem Party. Sorry, Danette, I can hardly hear you. Sorry.
I could barely hear you
that's
too,
okay.
Edie.
Sorry.
Y'all too quiet.
Y'all
What
need
I was
some
going to say
headphones.
is the reason that Stacey Abrams was so effective in Georgia is she spent 2.5 years literally going into these podunk towns and driving down dirt roads and knocking on people's doors and explaining to them what's a governor, what's a lieutenant governor, your mayor. Like, you've got people that don't know anything about how the system of government works.
Yep.
And
I didn't know I had a city council until they dropped a note on my door talking about an election. Okay. I'm so fucking serious. Like, you don't know until you don't know. Like, until I became politically active, I didn't know what I didn't know. Sasha, you want to jump back in here?
Yes, you know and unknowns.
Mm-hmm.
What have you been thinking about over there, Sasha?
Did we lose you?
Maybe.
She may be in the bathroom or something.
I do want to agree with a point. I feel like what Sasha was talking about in terms of being, building community. I think reparations is the onion that you peel back and you understand the whole picture. Like that, without a doubt, is true. But Sam talks about these small mutual aid projects and chapters all.
Oops. Oh.
All over.
Because his cat was attacking
That
him.
was my bad.
His cat is
I'm playing
eating
with
him.
stuff. Forgive me, y'all.
My cat is attacking me.
Feed your cat, man.
Did I go mute?
No, I accidentally took you off. Forgive me. I made a mistake. I was trying to make you like the main screen, but it took you off. So I'm gonna stop playing with stuff. Go ahead.
There's all kinds of things going on. You're deleting me. My cat's attacking me. People don't want this heard. I'm telling too much truth. Get out of here, Juicy. I was trying to kind of connect some of the dots together and just say I believe that my belief is that reparations is kind of is like the roadmap. It's or the onion that you peel back and you understand all the layers of how the society works and doesn't work by design. But that the things that Sasha and in other conversations Sam has talked about, mutual aid societies, building individual small community projects, that's the piece that gets you to the other piece. And I think it's very difficult to talk about politics and voting and even voter education if the place that you're having that conversation in has not already shown a commitment to your day-to-day life. So if I can go somewhere that's going to help me with navigating the school system or getting me food to eat or helping me deal with my lawyer, and I go back, the fourth or fifth time for something, and they say, by the way, I want to talk to you about voting independent in California, for example, and how you do that. Now I'm going to listen to you. But if my first encounter with you is, I want to explain to you why you need to vote for this referendum or for this candidate, I think people are automatically skeptical, especially Black folks, and they are right to be skeptical. I think it's not inappropriate. I have debates about COVID all the time, and ultimately, and I'm vaccinated, and I think people should get vaccinated. But ultimately, I'm going to talk to you one way about that if you're white. And if you're a Black person saying to me, I do not trust the medical system in America, I'm finished. Because I can't debate that with you. What am I going to say? Like, you should really have your faith and trust in how doctors in America are going to treat you as a Black person. Like that, my tongue's going to fall out. I'll be cursed and die telling lies like that. I don't trust. I don't trust that the economic system's going to help Black folks. I don't trust that anything that this entity, this government has created, this culture has created, is beneficial for Black folks, and that's why you need reparative justice to reconstruct, to reorient what we're doing around an admission of responsibility, and to make things right, to pay back the debts that's owed in order to reorder the entire society. You get there through these small, these chapters everywhere where you can go to people for real help and mutual aid, but not mutual aid like, I'm a DSA chapter. I hang out because I don't really have to worry too much about money. I've come up with like this cool project and I'm going to do it in my comfortable neighborhood, which is important too, but it's important the kind of how do you use your free time way. Mutual aid in the sense that people who are really in need of help get resources that get them that help, that life or death help, that getting somebody out of prison help, that navigating a potential eviction help. And so you need that community Sasha was talking about, I think, to get to reparations, which gets you to the big numbers that get you the electoral power that you need.
Yeah, no, I agree. Like I said, it's a starting from the beginning, right? Because like I said, I think I keep listening to people and they're just like, well, we got to start a third party. And it's like, well, what's the mechanism to keep them from screwing you over like the other two parties? I'm not saying so this is why I tell people, I'm like, I'm not saying I'm against what you're saying. I'm just asking questions, because if we end up having the same problem, then we're going to have to confront this at some point. So we might as well figure it out now. What's the mechanism? So again, for me, I really think like setting up, I don't know, it just makes sense, right? Because if we start coming together as a community, I think the problem is there was a period in time when people knew their neighbors. They knew their neighbors by name, they knew their kids. So if something happened to your neighbor, you gave a fuck. If we go back to having community, I feel like we'll still have problems, but we'll have fewer problems because at least we'll care enough to try to work it out with each other. Whereas right now it's like, I don't know them people, fuck them. Like the American and individualism thing is something serious. And we're just not in a place where we can do that anymore, especially because when climate change comes, people are going to realize the importance of community. And I think people who have been in those kind of disaster areas have, right? Because they had to depend on their community to help them. Anybody got anything else?
So I'm feeling like the issue, like I said earlier, Black people, I think that we maintain our communities even when your school in Detroit is full of mold, you don't have heat, you don't have running water. I think the communities remain intact. I think what's missing is an experience because we are separate and we are and not even an afterthought as a community, right? Like the Black community versus the white community.
I don't want to push back. Hold on. I don't want to push back against what you're saying, but I think your experience is different. Like, I have relationships with my family, but we don't live near each other. And like I said, so there's community amongst us, and we might share resources as a family, but that's not the same as being able to share resources as a community that with people who aren't your blood. So I get what you're saying. I'm not saying I don't feel like there's institutional community in a lot of Black communities. Because first of all, like, we're so spread out. Like, I live very spread out because I live in the West. I live in California. It's very segregated here. We're very bubbled off. So yeah, do we talk to each other, and yeah, do we get along, but do we actually come together and support people outside of our little networks? No. Unlike my grandparents in Arkansas, but I guess for them, like they'll organize or do stuff and help people for the whole town. And yes, this town does only have like 1,000 people in it, but I don't see the equivalent happening here with something like that in the West.
Well, I think that it depends on the size of your city, honestly, because I live in a town of 40,000 people.
Okay.
People come together for Martin Luther King parade. They come together for the Christmas parade, the Halloween parade. We celebrate like all the federal holidays because of the military. When both during the election, Stacey Abrams was hosting an event that was like a packed out house. She had 6 events in my town. And Trump came literally to Hinesville, Georgia, to deal with and, you know, hobnob with the Republicans in the community. So I think that when we're defining community, I really do believe that it depends on where you live. My husband has a friend whose last name is anchored to a town that's part of my county. And he lives in this community called Homestown, which is a historically Black community that after slavery, that's where all the Black people in the area lived. And as my husband's showing me this community, he's like, that's a Waldauer house. That's a Waldauer house. That's like, so they literally live in, around, and amongst each other. And I just think that it is a function of where you live as
Yes,
far
I
as
think the
how
South
community.
has community. I agree. I think
Yeah,
I think the South has a lot of culture, and they definitely still have community.
I agree with that.
Well, you also are a military community, right? So it's
yeah,
places where the police won't show up and destroy it. So we've had communities on the South Side that have been decimated by the police and by public
Mhm.
policy. They will not
Yep.
do that to your Army base centered community. They're
Yeah,
not
the
going to do it.
police don't even. I live literally a half a mile from one of the entrances to the military base, and you don't have police rolling through here. You very seldom do you even hear about police brutality. It occurs, but not to the level that. And we're a heavily Black community. It's 40,000 people, but there's more Black people sometimes I feel than white people. That's not true if you look at the statistics. But historically,
You're more out there, probably. You're probably more visible and doing community.
I mean, I'm not fearful of driving through my neighborhood or my town. I'm not. Now, I do caution my son. I'm like, okay, it's dark. You don't need to be out hanging with your friends at 11 o'clock at night, because there is an element in the community where we have these little back hole down the dirt road clubs and places where police tend to be when there's issues. And I'm not saying that we don't have crime. But I think it depends on where you live. And I think like we have a really large church that has a food pantry and a clothes pantry, and America's Harvest brings supplies to that church to feed people in the county. We even have homeless people that are in co-op type housing so that they're not like panhandling and living on the street. So it really does depend on where you live.
If you weren't military, they'd run the Black folks out of your neighborhood. That's so nice that
I'm sure.
You know what I'm saying?
Because
What
the Army
to me,
is heavily Black. It's like 40% Black. So yeah,
but you're military, and they need Black folks in the military for lots of reasons, right? So there's like Chatham, the neighborhood of Chatham in Chicago, one of like a solidly middle class, really, really like highly functional neighborhood. One anyone would love to be in the middle of, because almost no crime. Every block you go down, Chicago is a block by block city. this particular neighborhood for decades, every block you went down, beautiful, well-maintained, well-manicured, like largely owned home ownership, but there was some rental in there too. The folks in the neighborhood didn't call the police. They solved problems among themselves, and they didn't sell their houses to strangers. Anybody wanted to sell a house, they talked to each other and they found somebody who they knew who wanted to buy it. City of Chicago starts tearing down the projects, and they start forcing homeowners who rented in Chatham to take Section 8, and not just to take people who had Section 8 vouchers, but to just like not really be doing careful screening. Like a lot went with that, and it's a whole different conversation. But the point is, they forced people to turn their rental properties into revolving doors, and the crime started to go up. People started to call the police because they didn't know who these people were. So if there was some activity that looked criminal, instead of being able to call their neighbor and say, "Hey, Frank, what's going on in your backyard?" Now it's a bunch of strangers, often much younger people. So they're calling the police. Well, once the police show up, they're starting to do stuff that's destabilizing the neighborhood. Next thing you know, Chatham is now considered a crime-ridden neighborhood after decades of being a solidly middle class. There are studies on Chatham. How did they do it? What was their secret? There was no secret. They kept the city away from them for as long as they could, and they didn't let strangers come in and buy stuff. Overwhelmingly black neighborhood. It is where you live. I think you're right in that sense. But it's not where you live in the sense that if the outside world can come and mess with what you've got as a black community, they will.
And that's the problem, right? We've never been able to protect our communities.
That's it. Reparations.
That's why reparations, and that's why part of reparations has to be protections.
Well, the federal government and all these examples everyone's mentioning, you've noticed the power of the federal government, and that's the thing that really is leveraged in terms of those big grants, the big funding, the Title IX, the civil rights, all these, the protection. I mean, Thaddeus Stevens was crying when the Union troops left the South because the power of the federal government is important in terms of like, yeah, you can blame the military or all this stuff, but I think it's even bigger. It's just the power of the federal government being there. Like the state government is where you get all this fucked up shit that you hear about, but the federal government, say what you want, at least is the one that steps in and invents this money out of thin air. And SNAP benefits, those are federal funds. A lot of these programs are when the federal government is very involved in a state and in cities, and you could get these things happening where people aren't trying to rely on all this property tax. I just noticed that all these examples people keep bringing up about certain communities just shows that, when the federal government is very involved in communities, things do tend to work and they fund communities. So, I mean, that's, anybody that grown up in the 80s, 90s, 2000s, that's when the federal government kind of stepped outside of communities, right? And you did this public-private thing. So, more people, as you criticize the Biden administration all you want, and we're pushing back to the days of a little more federal involvement, which I can definitely get behind. And I think Dr. Darity mentions that a lot in reparations, that state by state, town by town, but the federal government, especially in terms of protection, like you mentioned, that's what it's all about, is when you at least get that federal government. You can have bigger governments, bigger conversations about abolishing the government and all these things.
Which is insane. Like,
but the federal government is what we have. Even Eisenhower sent in the troops. That's just tends to be. So I just noticed that in this exchange, it was fascinating to listen to. But I just wanted to maybe add that because I don't have much experience with like military towns and everything. So I always wondered like how they worked out. There was a Twilight Zone episode about one. That's all I know.
It's very interesting. When COVID first arrived in our area, from March to June, our numbers were at 150 cases, and it stayed that way from March to June. Our whole county, what they do is people that live on the military base, there's 3 elementary schools, but the middle schools and the high schools are in the town. So the military has to coordinate with the mayor and the school board to organize closures and stuff. So when they close the schools on Easter. We all go on holiday for Easter at the same time, spring break, summer, all of that stuff is all coordinated. When they shut the schools down in March, the entire town was on lockdown. The only thing that you could do is go grocery shopping. There was not a lot of movement. And on the military base, even now, to go into the department store, to go into the grocery store, to go into the hospital, you have to be masked up. You have to wash your hands. They have sinks that they use in the field with the soldiers when they're doing their training exercises. They brought in those sinks and ran water pipes from the water sources, and you cannot enter a building without washing your hands. So they keep the numbers low. What happened was, after the that they had postponed the primary. Well, the primary happened in June here, and after that, the mayor was a Trumper. He lifted all the mandates, and we went from 150 cases from March to June to 1,000 cases by October. From June to October, we went to 1,000 cases, and now our county is like 5,000 cases and like 300 deaths or something like that. And so, yes, the federal government matters. The federal government makes a difference. And I think that part of what's missing is an experience, especially for Black people, as being part of the American community. Because we're not seen as Americans. We're told to go back to Africa if we have an issue with how we're being treated.
So I definitely understand what you're saying with that. And I think this all boils back down to, for us with Black folks, is with mutual aid and using that over time to build new institutions, right? Because the problem is, no, regular Black people never had a hold of our institutions. Let's just be honest.
Right.
So new institutions need to be created that are taking care of poor Black people and doing things with poor Black people in our communities. Because again, when reparations comes, right, we want reparations to be a check, but we also want it to be programs, right? Well, if you are going to start giving money to Black institutions, don't you want that to be some of those institutions that should be created by regular people, not just the affluent and the wealthy? We got to do that stuff now before the reparations comes.
Yes, that's so important.
I wish Sasha was still on here, because Sasha was talking about, like, with the Jewish community, they had been building institutions for almost 50 years before they even got their money.
Right, but were they doing that? What I'm interested in is, we know that our community is poor. So
but
where are these
we are
coming
so
from?
that's the event thing, and people get mad, but our community has poor pockets. But the thing about it is, the whole point of mutual aid is about coming together and putting what you have together to get what you guys need as a community. And over time, like, if you build an institution, you can start looking towards getting funding. But without an institution, you can't really get funding, because it becomes charity. Mutual aid is a charity. It's literally everybody coming together and bringing resources together. We have working people who have government jobs in our communities. There's not a lot of them, but they have money and resources that they can help shift to other people in the community. We have that kind of money. We don't have money where we can feed all of our people, but we have money where we can shift stuff and create things that we can go, because there's grants out here that you can get for groups. And I'm not saying that we need to nonprofit mill our way through this, but I'm saying we need to create institutions, so when the money does come, we are in control of some institutions for ourselves as well. So it's not just
the Black people controlling anything in America without fear of reprisal is not going to happen until this country is transformed.
I don't believe that, because we don't have time for that. That's some weak shit. Like, that is some weak ass shit. We can't sit around here and wait to fix America before we can start getting our shit together. No, but what I'm saying is, we're in 2020, 2021. People can't run up in and burn our whole fucking institution down, literally, and murder us. Now, can they do sneaky shit on the outside, and can they do certain stuff? Yeah, but that's strategic planning. But sitting around and waiting, that's not.
No, that's not what I'm
option.
saying. I'm not saying that we sit around and wait. I'm saying that the institutions that you're speaking of do have to be built, but I also think that at the same time, we need to be working to transform the way that this country operates, because you're talking about grant money. And
so this is the thing, I agree with you on that part.
Just as an example, if you're seeking grant money and they know that you're a Black institution, are you really going to get the grant money? If we're working with the system,
so this is the thing though, but there are white people out here who have a lot of money who don't have problems donating money to Black institutions. They are out there. It's not going to be everybody, but they're out there. There are benevolent benefactors that will come in and help and not try to take over and fuck your shit up.
And there's different, I mean, we're on a continuum, right? Like we're, for the sake of, we have to do a little bit of sketching this out rather than getting into all the details, because even doing that, we end up talking for 2 and 3 hours. But for example, there are community development federal credit unions across the country run by Black folks, with mostly Black folks' money in them. In Chicago, we have one that is a majority Black board that has over $4 million in deposits, the average deposit under $1,000. Most of what we do is loan money for used cars, because that's what people want. The people drive, the depositors are members, and they drive the offerings we have. So we could be doing, we could try to do as many house loans as we wanted to, if that's what people wanted, but there would be this many. We say our general manager will say, well, this is what you can do if you want to do that. If you want to do payday loans, you can do this many. We do a ton of payday loan alternatives. They're not actually payday loans because those are predatory, but they're the same thing with a tiny interest rate. You borrow $100, $150. We have hundreds of loans for used cars that are in the works as we speak, because that's what people want. That's resources. People say the South Side of Chicago is broke, and these are broke people. These are poor people in Chicago pooling their resources, and we have successfully put $4 million together. That's not political or transformative if you don't plug it into a bigger vision, but it does exist. Yeah. So it's all got to kind of be put together, is what I'm saying. Yeah. It's not, and yeah, who tries to constantly tear us down? Banks. Banks hate us because credit union, banks are chartered so that they can't do what we're doing. The government does not want any kinds of lenders doing what we're doing. Awesome. And so credit unions were advocates, said, wait a minute, you make it illegal. If banks loan too many small dollar loans out, they are basically violating their charter and can be shut down.
That's wild.
So credit unions are like this thing that's not supposed to exist, that allows this small lending to happen. And so there are people with ethics everywhere, even in banking. So some of those folks many years ago said, hey, wait a minute, we need some kind of a lending device. We need a banking device for people who can't do these big dollar loans and stuff. And so that you have this, the banks have their lobby, I promise you, today, they are constantly going to congressmen and saying, you've got to revoke community development charters, or you've got to restrict what they're able to do. So that battle is constantly going on. We don't hear about it because the media doesn't care. The media won't care. If all the credit unions in America are shut down, the media is not going to care. Now, this is a rabbit hole too, because unions are connected to credit unions. So there's some clout there. But yeah, I mean, this stuff, people are doing this work right now. It's not linked together. It's not activated. The big vision isn't there. Black folks are not broke like that. If you give
we still have income. We don't have wealth, but we do have income.
Right.
That's
and
the
people
difference.
will pool their
Black
income.
folks have
people
income. We do not have wealth, but we come from a people where our people who've had more have always been willing to take a little bit off the top for themselves and invest in institutions that they believed in. The problem is we don't believe in our institutions anymore, and they don't belong to us, and they don't fight for us.
So then that's what's missing is Gabriel mentioned vision is missing.
The whole country is missing vision. Yeah.
Yes. And that's all that I'm saying, is that there's a vision that's missing, that brings us all together. I think we're tired. People are just tired. They're beat down and
So
they're
Danette, can
tired.
I pose this to you?
Absolutely.
The job of this group and the network is to create that vision, because the
Amen.
vision that has been created and has been being pushed is shitty. This white leftist fake socialism that they're pushing is some bullshit, and it's some bullshit for poor whites. This is some
Yeah.
make middle class America great again bullshit.
Yeah.
It
I
is.
agree.
I deny everything but what I have all along admitted. The design on my part to free the slaves.